Hello, everyone. Um, Good morning, and welcome to this very important conversation organized by JASS and Noor. No going back on gender justice, organizing against anti gender rights backlash. Before we move forward, I hope everyone has entered interpretation that works for them. We have interpretation in Spanish and English, Spanish and Bahasa for this conversation today. I'll just give you a few seconds to do that. Okay. So, as we all know, the attacks on gender justice post the last 3 decades since Beijing have only increased. But we also need to acknowledge the kind of power of organizing for women rights and gender justice that has paid off and given us so many cultural, social, political, and legal advances, even though we've continued to face unacceptable levels of violence, discrimination, and inequity. But today, we are again faced with an alarming new threat. More and more well funded and powerful anti gender rights efforts are trying to take us back to where we actually started. They are turning us back on all our gains. Um, this dialogue today is going to focus on what are some of the current global actors that are trying to undermine the gender rights work? What are some of the ways in which they are using narratives to legitimize the violence inherent in their efforts? And also how we can build collective strategies to block their agendas. Today, we have incredible speakers who have joined us from different parts of the world to share from their experiences and their context about who are these actors and how we are resisting them. So we have Tabitha. Tabitha is an advocate, academic, and activist who believes in preemptively and provocatively disrupting, defunding, deplatforming, and defanging fundamentalist ideologies in Africa. With over 13 years' experience navigating policy, human rights, health, and governance spaces in East Africa, Tabitha has implemented multiple projects addressing unsafe abortion, sexual violence, HIV, forced sterilization, LGBTQ rights, and teen pregnancies. Commencing in private practice, Tabitha's legal career weaves through several award winning entities, including the Federation of Women Lawyers, Kenya Legal and Ethical Issues Network, and consulting for UNDP. Fumi Pumi is an activist dedicated to understanding and organizing for liberation and freedom, linking economic history, violence, discrimination, and exclusion as an important part of reimagination. With extensive experience working in international and regional contexts, particularly in Southern Africa and Latin America, Pumi has been part of many change processes. Her journey began in 1985, organizing rent boycotts to resist apartheid. Sonia, Sonia has been involved in research and advocacy related to gender, sexuality, and human rights from the late 1970s. Between 1992 and 2009, she coordinated the Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights Program at Dawn, Development Alternatives with Women for a New Era. In that capacity, she followed the 1990s UN cycle of conferences. In 2006, with Professor Vitit Munterborn, she was the co-chair of drafting committee of Yogyakarta Principles on the application of international human rights law in relation to sexual orientation and gender identity. Hina, researcher, writer, and political organizer, Hina is politically active and organizing in Shia, Baloch, and transgender communities since 2010. She has worked in left leaning and feminist activist spaces in the past, such as Aurat March Karachi, Women Democratic Front, Karachi Bachao Tehreek, which are an evolving and growing movements of working class people and gender minorities. She is co founder of Pakistan's first political transgender pride, Sindh Murat March. She's a Chevening scholar and a SOAS University of London alumnus in gender studies, and she's also authoring a book on post partition evolution of Khwaja Sira culture in Pakistan. So, thank you so much to each speaker for making time generously for this conversation. Um, just waiting for Sonia to come on camera because she's going to be our first speaker. Hi, Sonia. I think we'll begin by setting a bit of a context into how we are seeing a well funded and coordinated pushback against gender justice worldwide with the rise, as we say, of fascisms and fundamentalisms. So, from your experiences, who are the key players behind this backlash and how is it showing up in your context, but also globally? But I'll hand it to Sonia to also set a bit of a context before we move into answering the question. Thank you, Sonia. Over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, maybe good night for some people watching us. I want to start by thanking Noor and JASS for inviting me for this session to be with friends from a long time, friends from that I've had just met more recently. And also this is an opportunity for me to be at CSW virtually because I was not able to travel to New York. Concerning the first question, which is about forces and actors that are reshaping the world today, and within that, moving in a direction that implies major threats to gender justice, I want to start by saying that the response to the questions about actors, and I think the other questions that will guide this conversation, will vary depending from where we are gazing at the state of the world. And this is why it's so important to have inter and cross-regional conversations to better understand what is happening today. But while interpretations may vary accordingly to our positionality, my own approach to this is that from whatever angle we may look at current world conditions, the forces at work and the shifts underway are highly complex and require us to constantly pause and ask if our analytical frames and the language we are using to describe what is going on is properly capturing what are the realities we are facing. I want to live that message from start. As you may know, my points of observation of the state of the world are mainly the provinces of the Americas, mainly Latin America, but also Europe, which are the regions that have been swept in the last decade by these expanding waves of anti-gender politics, which, it can be said, now have culminated with what is drastically emanating from Washington, D.C., under the second Trump administration. When examined from this point of view, the complex, transnational, and drastic political shifts we are witnessing are about attacks on gender justice, but it's much more than that. It is about the rise of neo-fascist or post-fascist regimes, and I think this must be named properly as such. As it also happens in the churches with historical fascism, gender is at the core of this juggernaut. It is, as it was in the past, about women, but also about those who gender does not fit into the dominant norms. And I dare saying that what is happening today is even more blunt and brutal than what we have witnessed in the 1930s. Suffice to look at the brutal conversion of gender non-conforming persons as the main internal enemy in the US. Yet the destruction that this neo-fascist juggernaut carries is fueled by passions for all forms of inequality, and we need to name that. It is also about demising the positive dimensions of the state, leaving intact its destructive powers, giving free reins to neo-imperial drives, all this talk about invading and annexing, and shutting down borders, targeting and delegitimizing environmental concerns. I think that properly understanding this moving scaffold and the place that gender and gender justice occupies in this hurricane is one of our main challenges today. Another point that I think it's very important is to understand that this has not started with Trump in 2016 or Bolsonaro in 2019 in Brazil or Milei in 2022 in Argentina. It's the outcome of a very long process of reorganization and reconfiguration of religious ultra-conservatism and the secular ultra-right, which can be retraced back at least to the late 60s. This reconfiguration has taken different forms in the US, Europe, in my own region, which is Latin America. But there's one common element to that, which is that these forces have left behind their blunt, classical, reactionary mode of political action to adopt an engagement in permanent battles for the capture of hearts and minds to assure political hegemony. This is what we have been calling in the field of anti-gender studies the Gramscian turn, the Gramscian shift of the ultra-right. And I suspect that feminism and the progressive camp, more broadly speaking, has not yet fully understood that shift. Lastly, and I'm going to end here, in what concerns the actor and forces that are propelling the storms, the most important aspect to be underlined is their wide heterogeneity, and most principally, the great ability to adjust to context and condition. They change according to the place, according to the political realities, according to political opportunities. For some time now, and many of you have heard me saying that, I have been resorting to the metaphor or the image of the hydra, this animal with many heads, moving in highly different directions and fitting in a variety of different or even contradictory ideological sources. These forces are religious and secular. They are Catholic, evangelicals, and even Muslim. Anti-gender ideology, although mostly propagated by those positioned at the right side of the spectrum, can be also shared by actors and voices on the left side of the spectrum. And perhaps more troubling for me and for many others is that this imagination, these ideas, anti-gender parlance is also propelled by feminist streams. And this is one topic that we need to address. This is why I think that to address the question of authors, although it's very important to list who they are, to name who they are, to analyze their connections, that we need to think of this Schön, this Jugendaut, mostly as an ecosystem, as a political ecology that is very complex and moving, and to use that frame to understand what is going on, to better understand what I'm calling the contradictory political ecology of neo or post-fascism of the 21st century. And I leave it there for my colleagues to continue on this track. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sonia, for setting that context. I'll hand it to Tabitha and then Fumi and Henna to take it forward.
Thank you so much, Sapika. Sonia has set a really high standard and high bar, so I am going to take the cue from her. For purposes of those who are watching us today, I am going to be speaking very slowly, which is contrary to my nature. I speak very fast, but because I have been reminded that we are doing interpretation and that because there are people here whose English is not a first language, So bear with me if I do take pauses. It's very intentional, just to allow the interpreters to catch up. I am based in Nairobi, Kenya, but in answering these questions, Sabika, I am also going to at least attempt to represent East Africa and Africa at large, because the work that we have done as the Strategic Issues and Research Council has crossed not only from Kenya, but gone to Uganda, and we have tracked these anti-gender movements in East Africa, and we are growing with the intention of making sure that we defang them at the African regional continent. The question that Sabika asked was, number one, who do we think are the key players? And inside that question, there's also the question around how are they manifesting? In the shortest time possible, I will say that there are at least 3 layers that we have seen evidently in our research of who the key players are. On every poster for a national prayer breakfast, there is the face of the speaker. And the face of that speaker looks like me, talks like me, and is a local. That's the first phase of who these key players are, right? The person who is fronted to be the mouthpiece of the anti-gender movement. That person in an African setting is a local whose names sound like, Pumi and mine. Those people, their skin color looks like even a little bit of a browner shade than mine, right? And the whole idea that these people have is to make sure that they create a facade that this is a local movement. On that same flyer, you will see at the bottom logos of who sponsors the event. So this is the second phase of who the key players are. And many instances, the logos that are at the bottom are not Global South partners, but it is organizations such as Family Watch International, Citizen Go, Political Network for Values, Yodo Luris, our Alliance Defending Freedom. Believe it or not, these are not actors who are from Africa, but they're the ones who are sponsoring the event. So the second phase of who the key players are is the global North actors, right? Actors who are then the ones who are financing these attacks. And then when you lift the veil, because what I strongly believe is that there's a third layer of players, the ones who are behind the financing, is when then you then get the third layer of actors who are the family, right? The ones who are financing and resourcing this. How is it manifesting in Africa? I'll tell you that we have seen them beyond hiring locals. We have seen national prayer breakfasts that have started cropping up everywhere from Ghana to Nigeria to Kenya to Uganda. We have caught the flu of national prayer breakfasts. And we also have SLAPs, that is strategic litigation against public participation, which is very unique right now. We've started seeing anti-gender groups go to court and get interim orders and executive orders and get injunctions against us, people like myself, from speaking in the name of defamation. So they are going to court and claiming that we have defamed them. They get executive orders. Currently, as we speak, 3 of our partners, IPAS, Helen, and Tika, have been sued by the leading anti-gender group here in Kenya, Kenya Christians Professionals Forum, and an interim order received from the courts to stop the 3 organizations from speaking about Kenya Christian Professionals Forum and the harm that Kenya Christian Professionals Forum is doing here. The last way that we've seen them manifesting beyond hiring locals, going to court to litigate, conducting national prayer breakfasts is also the rise of homophobic. We've seen it manifesting in an increase, a sudden surge in homophobic laws in East Africa. And not just East Africa, it's also largely Ghana, Kenya, Uganda, Zambia attempted it, Malawi attempted it. So we've also seen a surge in a singular template, tweaked just a little bit here and there, but the same punishments, the same criminalization of the LGBTQ. Let me stop there, Sabika.
Thank you, Tabitha. On to Fumi now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone. It's great because we rely a lot on like the research that Sonia, Tabitha, Nana with the journalists and a range of other people, inform us in terms of thinking about movement strategy. But in relation to these questions, there's two particular things I want to do to possibly go a step further in what Sonia describes as like the complexities and this what is termed unholy alliance in many ways that Tabitha talks to. One, for us in Africa, it's important to think about what the collapse of democratic institutions have entailed in terms of opening up space for these alliances to strengthen, on one end, traditionalism, culturalism, and possibly a particular way of thinking about nationalism. So behind these actors with a lot of money, one part is like the continued extraction of Africa and labeling Africa as the poor continent. So the entry becomes poverty alleviation. Because a lot of these 40 million that we've seen in the past 3 years of these actors and organizations that Tabitha talks to, they arrive in East Africa and Southern Africa through the churches to save us from going hungry. But behind that is this element of telling you who's to blame for why you are hungry. And often those who are to blame are women who are misbehaving, trans people who should not exist, queer and gay people who are harming the family, right, as defined by people like Go Citizen. So I think an important part is really thinking about to what extent is traditionalism, nationalism also a door that opens up in relation to who the actors are. We didn't particularly mention that violence amongst these actors is like the key thing, that is intended to sustain this particular ideology of what is the right family, what is the wrong way of behaving, and so on. So the way in which also, I think, not to ignore the actors who is the neighbor of the unwanted person, the actor who is the person on the street. Because when I think about hate crimes in a country like South Africa, which has been positioned in a particular way because of the constitution, because of its strategic geopolitical positioning, whether you think about BRICS and whatnot, because we cannot think about this issue without thinking about the economical balances geopolitically in relation of such attacks, and why particularly things like the freezing of funding is not just because it's not just because South Africa is part of that USAID thing, but it's part of a broader scheme of particular control of a way of being of a country like this one. So I do think we have to, for us as activists, as feminists, and what to understand the complexities of that is to understand what are some of the things that have been ignored, maybe via economical wings in terms of how the funding to support people at the most local, most basic level to sustain traditionalism and nationalism and to feed people, which is one of the important things of entry in relation to the anti-rights and anti-gender. I'll stop there, Sabika.
Thank you, Bhumi. Hina?
Hi, can you all hear me? Okay, so first of all the people, those who have spoken before me, like that was really great. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, sharing your work with me and all of us. So I'll talk about Pakistan, and when I'll be really specific when I talk about Pakistan. So in Pakistan, I come from a community which is like a third gender community, traditionally known as the Khwajasara or the Hijra community. We exist in South Asia and parts of India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. And since the colonial era, during the colonial era, we were criminalized. When the British Raj passed this legislation called Criminal Tribes Act in the 18th century, and post partition of and post independence of both India and Pakistan. When Pakistan came into being, I'll speak on behalf of the community of Pakistan because I come from that place. It took almost 6 decades for the Pakistani state and our Supreme Court to kind of like acknowledge us as officially a third gender in the country. So in 2004, our community organized started politically organizing massive protest to demand broader citizenship rights from the state. And in 2009, our Supreme Court acknowledged us as the third gender of the country and directed the parliament to legislate on the issue. So it took 10 more years for the lawmakers, and in 2018, Transgender Persons Protections of Rights Act was passed by the parliament. And but unfortunately, then the COVID and the lockdown happened, and as in any other situation in any other post-colonial nation state or in anywhere in the world, they do need diversion and they do need the powerful states, marginalized communities to be thrown under the bus. And this is what exactly we are seeing right now globally with the rise of right wing and with the rise of global transphobia all across the world. So that piece of legislation came under fire by Pakistan's right wing, and that was challenged um, in Pakistan's federal Islamic court. And even though we appealed, but nothing worked out, and our federal Shariat court uh, kind of like scrapped very important articles of that legislation. So it kind of like jeopardized our entire uh, like the liberties which were like uh, which we won by fighting for like almost 2 decades from the state. And for example, like the right to safe housing, accessible housing, access to healthcare, and right to vote, right to have an identity card, things like these. And then we appealed that decision, the Khwajasara community and the community activists in the appellate bench of Pakistan's Supreme Court, and it is still under review. But and then there were targeted and organized attacks on the members of the community and the activists all across the country. There was this wave of violence perpetrated by the right wing, supported by the state machinery. And what was new for us as the Khwajasara community was that so there used to be violence on the community before as well. Uh, there were mostly two forms of violences. Like uh, one was like when people used to beat us or kill us or exhibit violence on us. So it was usually in the name of honor by the family members, or mostly it was the intimate partner violence. But unfortunately, when because of this global wave of transphobia, when all of this was happening, we found out another pattern that the transphobic movement, the anti-trans movement in Pakistan, is actually funded by many global right-wing organizations. And the people, those who were quite vocal about abolishing the legislation and scrapping the rights of the trans community in Pakistan, they were they were like in quite solid alliance with the global right wing, especially in US and in UK. and we were being accused of, as people, those who brought something from the West, like kind of a foreign agenda introducing into the country. And then we had to establish that we are an indigenous community of South Asia. We have a recorded history of 4,000 years, and we did not come from anywhere outside this region. We have been existing here for centuries. And actually, what this transphobia, this hijraphobia is something which is quite Western. That is something which is quite, it has its roots in the colonialism. So yeah, and since then we have been fighting. It was the year 2022 when we first organized Pakistan's first Trans Pride, and after doing some research and conducting some surveys, we figured that in 2022 and in 2023, Pakistan was amongst the countries where, like, amongst the most unsafe and dangerous countries for trans people when it comes to violence against trans persons. Um, it was kind of like giving tough competition to Brazil, and which is something quite sad because historically the Khwaja community in Pakistan, we are called Khwaja in Pakistan. So it was like there was this cultural acceptance, but things have drastically changed because of whatever has been going on in the world. So, but yeah, this is what I wanted to share, and this is kind of an update on the current conditions of the gender minorities in Pakistan. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna, and everyone else. I think this has given us a good insight into how the attacks that are on the gender justice movements are not just at a local and contextual level, but there's actually an international solidarity that the anti-rights movement has. They learn from each other, they fund each other, they support each other, and they are present in each of our contexts. And if we scratch the surface, we'll find the same people in similar organizations doing this kind of work. But despite this kind of backlash, despite the legal, social, political backlash, despite the misinformation and propaganda, we've continued to fight. The gender justice movements have continued to resist their agendas, the agendas of the anti-rights movement, and we are still here, and it proves how much of effort we've been putting into this and the kind of successes and gains that we've received. So maybe moving on, we could discuss, if you could share, what are some of the strategies that have worked in our context globally that we've seen in our experiences in countering this backlash and carrying our work forward. Um, who would want to go first? Sonia, would you want to go first? Yeah. Thank you. You're on mute.
Okay. I can go quickly. Well, concerning the question of narratives and language and semantics, I think that it's what I said before about this shift of the mode of political operation and action by ultra-conservatives from the religious camp, but also the secular ultra-right. This engagement in this cultural battles, cultural wars for political hegemony, semantic narratives, language, discourse is central to that operation. And I think one important point to underline in relation to that is that this trend or this shift has been highly facilitated or enabled by the digitalization of politics and life itself. I dare saying that this neo-fascist forces, the ultra-right, would not be where it is now if it was not for the platforms and the digital infrastructure. And it's not accidental, therefore, that we see composing the pantheon of these powers, these main figures of the Silicon Valley, like Elon Musk or Peter Thiel. They are part of that compact from beginning, I would say. The second aspect I think is very important is that I think we need to understand that although this semantic, narrative, discursive war waged by these forces is a lot about misinformation. They lie, they defamate, they create horrendous stories about everything. We saw that in the Brazilian elections in 2018. We saw the attack on the fantasy that gender ideology meant giving babies in kindergarten milk bottles with a rubber as a penis. That type of, that is sheer lie. This is true. We saw that happening again in the US now in 2024, similar phantasmagories being propelled. But I think it's very important to understand that it is not just about misinformation or lying. These forces have also done a very sophisticated semantic, semiotic, linguistic stratagems to change terms that were known and understood and widely used into this accusatory categories. I think that what they did with gender and gender theory is the best illustration of that. There was a wide consensus about what gender is, what gender theory is, and what they did was to pick up the term gender, void it from its content, which is not a fixed content because gender theory is all the time changing. There's not a Bible of gender theory, as we know, but they voided it from this open, flexible, and critical ways of thinking about gender to make of this threat. Gender ideology as a threat to the family, to children, to nature itself. And I think it's important that we grasp the sophistication of that operation because that is not, what they did is not easily undone just by informing people correctly. We have also to engage in sophisticated strategies of deconstructing the phantasmagories and threats, semantic threats they have created. And just to end, I think that the battles we are engaged in to continue struggling for gender justice in its broad term are a lot about discourse and narrative, but they are also about real politics. It's about gathering forces, being able to access resources, being able to engage with institutions that we also fight these forces. And I think that in the next question, we may perhaps explore that other dimension of how do we respond to the neo-fascist shifts of our times.
Yeah. But Sona, could you also give us one or two examples of some of the successes that we've seen, the strategies that have actually worked for us? Maybe when we go to the next question. Okay. Okay, you're on mute. But yeah, maybe Fumi, Tabitha, either of you could add to this. What are some of the strategies that have worked in countering all of this, the narratives and the backlash that we've been facing? Yeah.
I have just sent on the group chat a link to a change.org petition that we did a year and a half ago, where we were frustrated as feminists in East Africa because Sharon Slater had just come to Uganda, and a month after she was here, the anti-homophobic act was passed. And what we did is that we decided that we were not going to go after Sharon Slater because Sharon Slater is renowned. She has been in this business of fundraising using homophobia since 1997. So we went after her husband. Her husband works, Greg Slater, at Intel. And Intel is a company that has, at that time, Intel had a very strong diversity, equity, and inclusion policy, and a very clear line around homophobia. So we went to change.org and we decided that we were going to call out Greg Slater, who is Sharon's husband, and Intel itself as a company for spreading homophobia in Africa. And we can tell you that immediately, because we do monitor the charts where these anti-gender groups are in, immediately the Guardian newspaper picked up this petition. Immediately, a few other newspapers, including Nat Geo Wild, picked this up. We saw Sharon Slater retreat and issue a frequently asked questions on her website on Family Watch International to start saying, I was not involved in any way in Uganda. So strategy number one for us has been that you've got to make sure you still have the courage to call these people out publicly. And that has worked for us in instances where we have had public demos. We have had instances where we have used change.org or any other spaces, including All Out, as a petition space that counters things that Citizen Go does. That strategy for us has worked, right? The second strategy that has worked for us is hijacking their narratives. Every year, there's a march for life by the anti-gender groups. For the last 2 years, we have supported a march for all lives, right? We have insisted that you don't just selectively march in the streets of Nairobi for 2 or 3 lives and you say, we're marching for the children, the unborn children. We're marching for, what about the sex workers who have been killed? What about the women who have died as a result of femicide? Where are they in your march? What about the children who were killed during the protests in Kenya last year? Why are you not marching for them, right? So for the last 2 years, we have hijacked their own narratives that they are marching for lives, and we have had our own spaces where we've said, we're marching for all lives, right? And we're using that narrative to say, we march for the sex workers who are killed, we march for the women who die from femicide, we're marching for the women who have had unsafe abortions, we're marching for all lives, hijack their narratives. And the last that has worked, Sabika, and I want to encourage this even in our thinking of the next steps, is the use of the courts. Not only in Kenya, but right now, the United States has proven to us that the courts are the only ones that are the last, holding that rope. If this was a tug of war, the hands of those judges are bleeding, and it is up to us to believe in the court and to be petitioners, because the court will always tell you they cannot initiate action. It is us to believe in ourselves as petitioners and to say, I'm going to challenge the USID executive order of President Trump. So the use of the courts, as tedious as it is, as time consuming as it is, we have seen the courts over and over again. And I want to recognize Center for Reproductive Rights in East Africa that has over time and again gone to court and said, we will litigate and we'll challenge this. It might take 5 years, but we have received positive orders. And I think that the petition by AVAC against the USID freeze in the United States is a stark reminder that the courts, in most instances, will be a space that we need to protect and guard zealously. Thank you, Sabika.
Thank you, Tabitha. I think, for me, would you want to add more to this?
Yes, indeed. A couple of things from what Sabika and Sonia says reminds us that importantly, like this is happening in the framework of CSW, is also to recognize the gains, right? As you started over so many decades in terms of like the United Nations processes from Cairo to the World Conference Against Racism and so forth. So some battles need to be waged in relation to how the UN is being reconfigured and how power is playing out there. The second one, like Tabitha says, is of course the thing about, national and sub-regional or multilateral spaces, but that sit in the regions, whether for us is the African Union or the African Commission for people and human rights. And then, of course, the national frameworks, parliaments and the national courts. I do think that for us, an important strategy has been about, as JASS, how power works and how sometimes a large part of what we understand as visible power, those powers where we are allowing the importance and recognizing the importance to defend one's rights, is that we have to also put strategies in relation to what you said, changing hearts and minds, right? Which is the most difficult strategy for us, changing hearts and minds. And I do think in one part, the left is maturing in as much as feminists are engaging in the complexities of understanding the economy, of understanding how that has shaped or can shape what feminist ideals in this current geopolitical moment entails. And I do think that the idea of when people who are othered are experiencing the type of backlash that we are seeing, but are continuing to affirm the right to exist, the right to be, is as much as an important strategy in terms of facing the backlash. For us, the important things have been around thinking about what safety looks like, not only in the digital space, but also in relation to how one lives in communities and so on. So strategies related to survival. We're not speaking about thriving at the moment. It's amazing how LGBTIQ organizations, sex worker rights organizations are actually thinking about what it means to survive, but also to defend one's rights and to make new strides in the new. I do think that in this current moment where geopolitics are working in this way, which is not just because the orange man is in power, but we see, for instance, how the alliances between the orange men and genocidal countries are organizing themselves. It does require us, when we think about sexual and reproductive rights experiencing backlash, that we engage in understanding what is the bigger complex issues. How does Russia play into this? Russian Orthodox. How does the European configuration in that? And until we have the good research that some of our comrades are doing to be able to understand what is the local, what is the national, and what is the regional strategy that is able to deal with those things, that is the only way we can be able to sharpen. But we recognize that this is not going to take only a couple of people of that. It does require rethinking what progressive politics entails in this moment. What being a progressive, what does progressive theology means in this moment when we think about it's not just a particular type of Muslim that is responding in relation to the murder of our Imam here. For example, it's not a particular type of evangelism, but what is the voice of, what are the voices of progressive theologians in challenging other faiths and beliefs in relation to making our lives not being othered, our existence not being eliminated. And I think when one thinks about contexts where one has to flee, because often, at the most intimate, when violence hits at home, one has to think about fleeing and then becoming an added access people, as we understand the way in which migration and refugee is being thought of. It does require us to think about strategies that are beyond just survival in the confines of the borders and defined boundaries of a document one carries. I cannot emphasize enough that The complexity of this issue really requires a resharpening of strategies, really requires us to think beyond the ways in which we used to understand activism to mean. This attack is not just an attack on a particular view, it's a defense of a particular ideology, a particular belief on how to be in life. And if you are not a part of that definition, then you are regarded as not worthy to continue to live.
Thank you, Fumi. Passing it on to Hina.
So when when things turn really bad for most of us in Pakistan, so what we decided, like the community largely is not like economically stable community. So we live below the margins. We do live below the poverty line in Pakistan, and we also face extreme violence because of our visibility. So what we started doing, also the community largely relies on three sources of income. One is like begging. Second is like they do dance and functions and events, like theatrical performances. Third is sex work. So other than these three sources of income, which are otherwise considered like not so respectable sources of income in Pakistan, in general, like by Pakistani society, and also they are not very stable and like modes of income as well. So what went wrong with the Pakistani government and the society in general is that they had a problem. They started having problem when the Khwaja community decided that we will demand broader citizenship rights, and that will include right to education and right to work and horizontal reservations. So that was something which bothered the Pakistani society in general. So the cultural acceptance I was talking about before was that only, that they were quite okay seeing us performing or sleeping with them or begging, but they have never imagined us in spaces like schools, colleges, universities, workplaces, offices. So that was, I guess they saw us as a threat. And once that happened, then the entire propaganda was being unleashed by the state. So we have seen people being killed from our community. And but what we did, which was something quite unimaginable back then, because uh, I personally did not think in the beginning that it will be something possible for us. But I guess the advantage was also that the Khwajasara community is an organized community in South Asia. So, like, we are an organized community, and like the gender diverse people in the Western societies, that's not the case in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. We live in a kinship based system, which is like quite organized. So, that helped us politically organize as well. So, we reached out to other community members in different cities of all across Pakistan, and then we decided to take it to the streets. So we regularly started protesting outside press clubs of Karachi, Lahore, Islamabad, different cities. We started showing up at, so before, if a trans person is being arrested by police, so nobody, people used to be so scared that nobody used to show up at police stations. And we used to reach out to our cis allies to show up and then do something, get that person out. But things changed when the community took it upon themselves, and then there were times as well, like we have seen that if a trans person is being like illegally detained in a police station, so the entire community will be protesting outside the police station. And things like these, I guess, actively protesting and politically organizing at the face of terror, that kind of like compelled the state to come to the negotiating table and talk to us, see us as humans. even though they still refuse to do that, but they are able to now have a conversation with us, and we are able to have a conversation with them. And breakthrough came when so during all of that, there was this politics of HIV sector, which was quite dominated by the Western donors. So if you are working on HIV prevention in Pakistan, it is something quite understandable that the funding comes through the Western countries. So once upon a time, like 3 years back, uh, people sitting in New York, they decided that they need to cut down the funding, and the entire HIV services delivery was shut down all across the country in Pakistan, and people started dying. So we realized that we need to take it, we need to take it out, take this thing up with our own government, and we pushed our government that you need to work on this, you need to provide HIV testing, you need to work on ART, you need to work on PrEP. So we shouldn't be relying on institutions so unreliable that they simply bail on their own people. So how can you guarantee this, that they can be there for us? And I think during these past 3 years, we were able to build parallel and alternative mechanisms and systems in place. Where recently, when the US administration, they cut down the funding of through USAID, so we have seen the first transgender clinic being shut down in India. But that did not happen in Pakistan because we were able to create parallel systems, alternative systems to survive, and that's how we have been fighting this thing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we've seen what are some of the strategies that we've been using, whether they're legal or getting public support or boldly speaking up, and as well as doing the work of changing hearts and minds, as Pumi said. And I think now that we've been faced with even newer challenges, looking at our experiences of the strategies that have been successful, moving forward, what do we think are the ways in which we can strengthen solidarity across movements and borders so that we can protect and advance gender rights, considering we have newer challenges now? So, how do we move ahead, and what lies ahead for us in terms of our strategies and the fight that we have to face? Um, would want to go ahead first? I mean, I'm sorry, I'm taking Sonia's name again and again, but Sonia,
No,
do you
I can,
want to
I
start?
can start. Yeah, I can. I want to talk about this, but as the conversation was going, I just remember to say something that I missed in my previous intervention about the long-term trajectory of the processes and forces that we are facing in today, because we are speaking to CSW that commemorates the 30 years of the Beijing conference. I think it's worth reminding that the very first attack on gender happened exactly 30 years ago in the CSW session that was devoted that was used as a final prep comp to the Beijing conference. It was then that the Vatican and US-based Christian rights organizations, women's Christian rights-based organizations, have attacked the concept of gender. And this is not the beginning of the story of anti-gender ideology within the Catholic Church, but it was a very important moment, because it's out of that we have seen this unfolding, continuing unfolding of anti-gender ideology, writing, propagation, and mobilization that take us today. And I think it's very important to remind that. Thinking about alliances and also positive experiences, I want to suggest that although the conditions we are going through are very challenging, because we are coping with challenges that are and forces that are both local and transnational, that have a geopolitical dimension, that forces that are threatening institutions, that are waging wars towards many different directions, the economy, education, migration, the multilateral system, environmental protection, denying the climate change or the climate crisis. This is, on the one hand, is very challenging, but I think it gives us an opportunity, an open space for us to respond to these challenges in an intersectional manner. As we have seen in this conversation, anti-gender and neo-fascist, post-fascist forces are highly intersectional. They are religious, they are secular, they involve powers that be in terms of economic elites, powers that be in terms of state institutions, but they are also ground-based. They have the faces of local people, established, as said, but they also have the faces of the major owners of the world today. We have to respond to that intersectionally. And I think that the many threats that these shifts are meaning for the world open the ground for us to engage with others in responding to these challenges and threats and waves of concrete destruction. Because what Trump is doing in the US is destruction. What Milei is doing in Argentina is destruction. And I want to give you the incredible example that maybe not everybody in this conversation have heard about, of what happened in Argentina in early February. The Argentinian LGBTIQ plus movement has decided to organize out of the time Pride March in February to respond to the attacks that Milei has included in his speech act to the Davos meeting in Switzerland. He made against a very aggressive speech against gender, against feminism, against woke ideology, which is how they frame it. And the Argentinian LGBTQI plus movement organized this huge manifestation. What is amazing is that the manifestation was joined by many others. The retired people complaining about what Milei is doing to the pension system. University teachers and researchers were on the streets shouting against what Milei is doing about the demise of the public university system in Argentina. Workers, housewives complaining about the situation of the economy. It was an incredible moment of intersectional politics of resistance that I think has used the opportunity of the wide range of targets and the wide destruction that these regimes are promoting to be able to engage with, have conversations with, establish dialogue, and do politics together with other sectors, groups of society with whom we have not exactly been able to engage so closely in the last few decades. So I think this is one very important example of how to build up not just solidarity, but also a politics of sharp and clear and strong resistance to the forces we are facing. And just to end very clearly, we need to organize transnationally. We cannot respond. Local resistance is vital. It's fundamental, as Fumi said. I mean, the ways in which people are resisting at ground level, it's absolutely crucial. Thinking of trans people in the US, LGBT people in Argentina today, women trying to access abortion in those countries like Brazil, or where even legal abortion services are being targeted. These forms of resistance are vital. but they need to be connected, more widely connected transnationally. And these experiences must be exchanged across the boundaries.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sonia. Maybe Hina, would you want to speak first? Because I think Hina has to go early. So maybe for this last question, Hina, would you want to give your closing remarks?
Yeah, thank you. So I just wanted to say, like, while working on the issues concerning the transgender and the intersex communities in Pakistan, what really helped us while kind of like pushing for the this whole movement for rights and demanding broader citizenship rights or civil rights from the state was building solidarities across different marginalized communities. For example, in the context of Pakistan, there are religious communities, minorities, those who are
Mhm.
marginalized. For example, the Shia community, Hindu community in Pakistan, Christian community in Pakistan, they are quite marginalized religious minorities. Other than that, there are people, those who come from the working class segments of the society. They are like people, those who work in factories. There are people, those who work in railways. So, similarly, there are ethnic groups, those who are marginalized, and they are fighting as well for almost the same things what we are fighting for, the Baloch communities, Pashtun communities. So we realized that we need, like, no fight can be fought in isolation, no battle can be won in
Mhm.
isolation. We need to build solidarities across these communities, and we need to bridge the gaps, and we need to come to this one united front, at least, so that we can be like, there's power in numbers, and like we need to kind of like form one sort of a united front, and which we really did in at least in Karachi, and we were able to push back because of that, because there were other people, those who were willing to listen to us, and there were other people trying to understand what we are going through. Other than that, internationally, what really helped is that we also sought help from activists in India and in Iran, trans activists, and they were quite of like huge support to us in terms of like exchanging solidarity, especially when it comes to India, because the culture is quite similar. And in Iran, that was like we sought kind of a ideological support, because in Pakistan the argument against us was that we are something which are like not like, they were weaponizing religion against us. Ironically, in Iran, being a trans person is not a crime. So it really helped to build these solidarities across communities even outside Pakistan. And then we were reached out by certain trans organizations and activist groups from the global north. To them, we just like we thanked them, and we were like, so people sitting in the global north, if they actively advocate for certain quite sensitive topics for communities like us, it creates problems on ground for people like us. So we ask them to just echo, do not speak on behalf of us, but to echo what we say, to echo our voices,
Mhm.
and they respectfully did that. So it really helped, and it is still helping in that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Hina, and thank you for making time to be here. Uh, Fumi and Tabitha.
Okay. I keep thinking about how we need to remember history. You know, whether it's the dictatorships that Latin America was, ravaged with, colonization across this continent, and from a country that was almost liberated just a few decades ago. That there's so much that was organizing, that it's important lessons to draw from that, even though it may manifest differently, but there's a lot that we can take from that moment, which also is beautiful to hear the story about the march in Argentina, which I think speaks to, for me, to how singular issues or singular struggles is not going to free us from this moment, that we need to think beyond my issue, my bed, my roof, my what, but to think about, how the housewives are affected in as much as how the labor movement is affected. So that is important. And I think we need to lift that and learn from those moments. I think equally to think about people to people solidarity and internationalism, because we've always known there's a South in the North. We have challenged our people in the not be, approach us in an exceptionalist way. And I think this is a particular moment of recognizing across for South Africans that you're not exceptional on the continent, for example, and also our US-based siblings to understand that you're not unique in this way, but to find a way in which we can understand this wave of violence and a struggle of capitalism to reconfigure itself and white supremacy to blow in this way, that we can find each other through people to people international solidarity. I think the other thing for me that is important is it's really to think about what it means to resource our struggles, to resource our movements in a way in which thinking about infrastructure in a moment in which the winning of governments in the North that we have depended to is right, or right wing rather, which means that it is reducing a large part of what we have known to depend on and to rely on, for me, from years of struggling against apartheid. But it's an important moment to think about how we are going to resource our struggles and who our allies are going to be in that struggle. It's a long haul. It's a long haul, and we must defend and find ways to make small wins as we go forward, but to sustain those wins, because we know that in the minute we win something, there will be an attack on what we win. The last thing I will say is about how continued research and movement building, feminist movement building and strengthening is fundamental. I cannot imagine not informing our strategies based on quality founded, well researched work being important. The work, both what Noor, Tabitha, Sonia, and all of you do, it's important for the work that we do in relation to strengthening movement strategies. So I will end there for now. Thank you.
On to Tabitha.
I will pick it up from there. Very sound advice. I love the idea that we must stop thinking about my roof, my food, my plate. How do we foster solidarity? If there's any funder who is in the room, I think one of the things that I'm going to call in collectively is for us to remember that it's not just work, work, work. But if there are moments for us to fund feminist joy, spaces for us to come and just laugh and dance, because we are having a lot of time to cry and anxiety. So, Sabika and Bhumi, please, it's not just moments for us to come and unpack research, but I want to say that, yes, absolutely. I'm challenging those who are here that we will need the few spaces that are there for us to create that little ecosystem of joy, to remind ourselves that even in the Orange Man, as Pumi called him, in the world of the Orange Man and Elon Musk, we still have some space to dance. And dance is resistance. Enjoy and enjoying ourselves is part of the resistance. So I would say that in that collective solidarity between now and 2028, or whichever year this Holocaust ends, this horrific space that we're living in right now ends, can we find moments of reconnecting, just with no agenda, with no program of a 3-day conference, right? Spaces for us to just come and sit and dance and enjoy ourselves. That's my first challenge to us in how we create solidarity. The second one is the use of technology. I think we have also forgotten that in a space where we do not have funds because USAID funds have been frozen, technology and moments like this, we can continue using technology to convene, to coordinate ourselves, to bring ourselves together, to have moments of exchanging notes. Because everything we've said here today, right from Kenya to South Africa to Latin America, we're sharing in this, and we're all collectively acknowledging that the Hydra, the face of the Hydra is one. We are seeing it all. So there's an acknowledgement that even the solution has to come from that coordinated effort to tell Sonia, cut this limb of the Hydra, to tell Fumi, cut this limb. And the use of technology is a space for us to continue the solidarity, even when the funds are limited. So I just want to do those two quick contributions in addition to everything that everyone has said.
Thank you so much, Tabitha, and thank you, everyone. I think all of these, I think the fact that we have to strategize together transnationally, locally, but also at the same time continue to dance and resist, and that our joy itself is such a big method of resistance against the orange men. I think I'm going to use this for the next 10 days. Um, but maybe now we go on to some questions that the audience has already asked. We have them in writing, and any if you could answer it. I think the first question is, how do you ensure that your safety and protection is assured when countering the anti-gender and far-right fascists? Anyone wants to take this?
I mean, you spoke about safety and security. So I was looking at you because you had mentioned something about it. Should
You
I
wanna?
throw that to you?
No, I think that there is so much work that has been done, whether you look at JASS's work or the IMDs in Latin America and many other feminist networks that have put over the past few years tools, and I'm sure someone will also put a link to some of these tools. The truth is that we cannot guarantee that we will be safe because we work on issues that make us unsafe, right? We have to recognize that just working on issues that are not popular and not welcomed by a very resourced machinery that is against us cannot mean that we can guarantee our safety. But of course, we have tools in terms of like what we have to have in place, minimum, that can guarantee that we continue to do this work. And sometimes when people have been in like the most threatening situations, we also have means and mechanisms to make sure that they are removed. In a worst case scenario, we know that people get assassinated, right? Like we've seen in recent months, we know that people get assassinated. So it's a complex question. And yet I am hoping that as part of movement infrastructure, organizational infrastructure, that this is an important aspect to take into consideration. There isn't a one size fit all. One has to think about how your organization works and what things you do that expose you and how to organize in a safety way. And there are, like I mentioned, organizations who work on that. So it's quite complex. And I'm sure that there are many of us on the call. There are tools available and there are ways in which you can reach out to us to kind of like accompany organizations or recommend organizations who work in your context to particularly think about safety. And some of these things, just to end, they're not really complicated and complex. It's not like you have to start buying a particular thing to be safe or hire 20 people to kind of like surround you. It's not that. Sometimes very small basic things are the ones that expose us. Some things that we can actually do a 1, 2, 3 small thing to be safe. So happy for people to see in the chat some of these tools, and we can see how we can support.
Thank you, Rumi. I think the next question that we have is that although it was typed, it says that the impact of the withdrawal of US aid is there. I also think the person who's asking the question says, I also think that it is necessary giving its use as a new colonial imperialist tool. Are we as feminists in the global south taking advantage of this moment to decouple from the West? So, how do we grow our movements in the absence of aid? And most importantly, how do we begin to decolonize the narrative? I think Tabitha already shared a resource. Maybe we could address that a bit more with you, Tabitha. Maybe you can take this more forward and then others can
Yeah.
answer.
All right, yeah, that's a really good way of asking the question, Sabika. So beyond USID, because it's not just USID that is withdrawing funding. All right, we have seen in the last 1 month about 8 countries that have been key global donors, from Sweden to the Netherlands. They have all indicated now that they are going to be inward facing. So that's a really good way of asking the question around, what does a world without foreign assistance look like? I shared in the resources and in the chat an article that was done by Katondi Soita of Open Democracy, where she actually did an investigative piece to unpack 3 local entities, one based in Uganda and 2 based in Kenya, that have been doing alternative queer funding in a space where we know that queer people are criminalized, and therefore they're unlikely to be registered, and therefore they're unlikely to qualify in terms of the requirements, the harsh requirements that many of the donors have. So number one is to let Jennifer know, and others who are asking, that alternatives have existed. It's just that we have never found time to document them. There are small groups that are doing creative work and resourcing for themselves, purchasing organic foods or raising chicken, and part of their buildings are being used for rent in Africa, and they're generating funds that are self-sustaining. This has been, necessity is the mother of invention, and creativity comes in when such a moment calls for it. Africa, particularly, I also want to call us out and call us in, of course, but to call us out because in Africa, there's also been that reliance, and we've not also had our own philanthropists. And this is a space to go back to institutions such as the AWDF. It's time to go back to institutions that are very Africa focused, whereby we can be able to do that, and also to call upon you, the number of people who are on this call, 83 of us. If we chipped in $1, into all those movements that we are giving, and I'm not saying this to take away from the church, but I have always told people, if I started alternatively giving the offerings and tithe that we give to church, that you started giving to feminist movements, just $2 out of the $10 that you give to the church, we could also start the kind of collective fundraising that we're talking about. I think we have this big global idea that fundraising has to be 700 million, right? And yet we have seen people do much more with less. We have also seen institutions come up with creativity and creative ways of charging people, running for concerts, doing, yes to the feminist type, right? So there's a lot of creativity. And if you catch me at it's 4:30 p.m. in East Africa. If you catch me when I've had my 7 a.m. coffee, I could give you 10 ways in which we can raise funds creatively without necessarily relying on the 700 billion from the USID. But just to also say, I must also insist that please let's also not demonize USID. I am a beneficiary. In my past life, I have worked on HIV, I have worked on queer rights, I have worked on vaccination, including HPV and tetanus vaccine. As a woman who has had 2 children, I have enjoyed the benefits of both the tetanus vaccine and the HPV vaccine, all of which were provided for in Kenya by USID. So I also want to dissuade us from believing every misinformation that we have received about USID and demonizing it. I've known instances where, yes, it has been a tool for neocolonialism, but I've also seen instances where those who have had programs running during good eras in the USID, in the US departments and US governments. We've seen vaccines, we've seen maternal health, we've seen mosquito nets, we've seen TB, we've seen HIV interventions in many of these countries that have been life-saving. So I must also insist on that last part, Sabika, just to say that for those of us who have been beneficiaries, I might also want to say, can we dig in and do our own due diligence around instances where USID was misused, but all instances where USID has been life-saving. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tapasya. Sonia, do you want to add to this? You're on mute. You're on mute.
I want to respond to the question on the multilateral system and the UN in particular, but I want to pull off what Tabitha just said. I think that this crisis in relation to corporation resources, development corporation resources, give us an opportunity again to sit down and discuss this matter more fully than we have had done in the last few years. So I'm calling perhaps for Noor and JASS to organize a specific debate on this matter for us to have time to go in depth into that discussion as required. But I want to insist with what Tabitha says. It's fundamental for us to be able to delink the imperialist dimensions of international cooperation, that is a reality, from the collaborative dimension of international cooperation, which is about multilateralism. We don't want multilateralism to be destroyed as it's now happening, and same forces that are attacking gender are also attacking multilateralism. So I think to delink that is very important, but also while doing the critique of the imperialist features and dynamics of international cooperation and USAID in particular, we cannot lose sight of the devastation, the real concrete devastation that the demise of USAID is meaning for people at the ground level. I'm thinking of Mozambique, for example, which is going through a major political crisis and at the same time had 80% of its health system dependent on USAID money. And I can just imagine what is going on at the ground level about maternal health, malaria, other diseases, emergencies, HIV/AIDS. So it requires complex thinking. Huh? How do you criticize that imperialist feature at the same time don't lose sight of the tragedy that the demise of USAID is implying, and at the same time not totally abandon the idea that international cooperation has a positive dimension. I think this is very important. As for the UN, and that question comes from my friend Radha, thank you, Radha. I think that in the same manner, in relation to the UN, we are caught or we are challenged not to provide easy solutions. It's not either or, because the UN, in my view, has taken too long to grasp with what is going on in relation to anti-gender politics. Let's remind that the first institutional response to anti-gender politics at the UN level was Victor Madrigal's report on anti-gender forces in 2021. anti-gender wave was full-fledged. It was reaching its level of maturation. Milei was almost elected in Argentina when that happened. So the UN is sort of delayed, very much retarded and delayed in responding to that. And this requires criticism again. We have to say that and call upon the system to respond more consistently and more firmly to what is going on. At the same time, Radha, as you know better than me, the system is under attack. It's heavily under attack. How do we do that in a manner that is not pulling additional waters to the meals of those that want to have the multilateral system in the UN down to the ground this time? So it's like treading a fine line between the two things, and I would recommend that we are able to grapple those complexities in this case as well. And thank you so much for being with you today, because we are reaching time. Huh?
Yes, thank you so much, each one of you. Thank you, Sonia, Homi, Tabitha, and Hina, and the whole JASS team, and to each attendee for being so generous with your time and making this very important conversation possible. And it is very clear that this is not the end of this conversation. There are going to be more spin-offs from this, and we've received so many strategies and experiences and ideas to think about and mull over and to make them a reality. But I think this is the time for hope, and I just want to read a few lines before we close, which is that an excerpt from a poem, that when we hold each other, we rise. I am because you are, because your hands have lifted, your voice has thundered, your love has refused to yield, your friendship has stayed committed. We walk, not as shadows of each other, but as hands clasped in light, not bound by blood, but by promise of ours, made in the quiet of knowing that none of us are free until all of us are free. None of us are at ease until all of us are at ease. This is not just struggle, this is love woven fierce, woven forever. Here in the warmth of our dreaming, we are not alone. Here in each other, we rise. Here together, we remake and we rebuild the world. When we hold each other, we rise. And thank you so much, each one of you, because this is just the beginning of so much more beautiful work, joys, and dreams that we are undertaking. Thank you, and see you all soon.
'Cause finally the tables are starting to turn. Talking about a revolution. Yes, finally the tables are starting to turn. Talking about a revolution. Oh, no. Talking about a revolution. Oh.